Rajan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here. I'd love to start off with a bit of an introduction. How would you introduce yourself, Rajan?
Yeah, right. I'd sort of say I'm a semi-amateur professional tennis player. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I like to self-teach myself on the guitar. And I think it's important to talk about those things first because, people often talk to me about architecture and that's cool. And that's what I do like for quite a lot of my time, but I'm much more than that. And those are the places that I tend to connect with people as on as all those other things, whether it be the podcast I'm listening to or the thing on Netflix or the books I'm reading, because I'm a big book reader as well. But from an architectural perspective, I've lived my whole life in New Zealand, in Aotearoa. I studied at the University of Auckland and I finished here in 2007. Went into practice at the start of the recession, which was interesting in terms of companies shrinking in size, but then having this great opportunity to just soak up and absorb everything because I was sort of cheap and enthusiastic. Ended up doing all kinds of things that you wouldn't normally get to do as a graduate. And so that was, lots of time on site. It was running small jobs. It was contract stuff. It was, you name it. And then, so that was my first job at Stevenson & Turner. And then I moved to Chow in 2018. And I've been there since and I'm just recently become a senior principal and shareholder there. And my focus in this practice has been around aged care, primarily. So that's retirement villages, that's people who need hospital-style care, and that's designing for people living with dementia. And that's sort of the thing that keeps me busy most of the time. And in more recent times, there's been a lot of getting out there and just talking to people and finding out, what are people thinking about building, what projects are out there, and even just what connections can I make for people, because often there's not really a project, but there's a need. And it's about me being, well, I'm the architect, you don't need me, but here's this engineer, or here's this property person, or here's this lawyer, talk to them, and then if you still need me, give me a call back. And often that's sort of the role that you play as well. So you're trying to be a connector and a conduit to all these different people. It's almost like the old photograph, or those old videos of the telephone connectors who are just taking the wires, and I feel a little bit like that. So,
Yeah.
So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, case in point today, thank you for doing this. And I guess this is a bit of a connection. And,
yeah, absolutely.
What connection to the masses as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Or the 10 people that will watch this podcast.
Yeah, 10 people who I'm sure will hopefully find this interesting, but if not, they'll listen to the first 5 minutes and think, oh yeah, that was a cool jacket he was wearing, and at least I got something out of it.
Yeah. Well, I'll show up the next time with a beautiful jacket of mine
do
as
that.
well. I'll go pink salmon so that we have a bit of a split.
Yeah, good on you.
One of the things that you've said is humans are amazing. Architecture is the way to facilitate humans to be amazing. Will you explore that with me, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first encounter with this kind of as a philosophy, and what you recognise when you first go into practice is architecture can be really banal. Like you're doing door schedules, you're doing window schedules, you're door hardware, you're doing toilets, you're doing like this stuff which is really basic. It's fundamental and really important, stair details, but it makes for quite a stark difference from university. And I fell into a job where I was doing this commercial office refurbishment over 3 floors, and we finished the first floor. And I was sitting there talking to one of the builders, and the builder, and I won't repeat exactly what he said because it was builder speak, but he effectively said, look, everybody in this building is suddenly attractive. And I sat there with him for about 5 minutes just talking about everything else, and I was watching these people come in and out. I'm like, yeah, it's like they've hired a whole new workforce. And so anyway, that sort of sat in my head, and I ended up talking to the CEO a few weeks later. And I just asked them, hey, have you had turnover? What's happened here? Because I've just noticed everyone's just, looks like you've got a different crew of people. And he said, no, everyone's dressing up. So the next time I sat down outside, and this was, there must have been about 200 plus people across these 3 floors in the end. And the irony is that the ground floor was a call centre. So no one actually ever saw these people. But they were dressing up. So the cargo shorts, the sandals, the T-shirts were all gone. It was all shirts and blouses and stuff like that. And what was really cool about that is that people were dressing up for the space. People were dressing up because they felt valued. And talking to a project manager who was on the job with me at the time, and he was an art lover and quite an interesting chap, we got to talking about how what we do affects people. And I had never really made the connection there by designing a space that was bright and colourful and had access to outside and all sorts of little things we take for granted, particularly when you're moving from like an 80s Rabbit Warren-esque office into an open plan one, that people responded in really weird and positive ways. Mm-hmm. And his challenge to me was, go home tonight and create a spreadsheet. And in the spreadsheet, just, start by the number of staff. And I think 120 was the number I started with. And he said, if you've made each of those staff members just a little bit happier, they're dressing better. Think about this as being on the scale of what you would do when you go to a wedding. When you go to a wedding, you dress up, and it changes who you are. You just present your best self. So you're happier, you're more engaging, you're interested, you're curious. You're doing all these things you don't normally do day to day because you just have no time. But putting on your suit, your dress, it's like a uniform because you're superpowers. And the same thing was happening at this workplace. It was like a different order of magnitude lower, but people were doing the same thing. And so he said, get the spreadsheet out and think about, what's the average size of a family? So I put the numbers in there, and he said, well, how many people will this person interact with outside their family? Maybe the person at the dairy, the person at the gas station, maybe some colleagues at work. And just think about how quickly the number of people you affect multiplies. So, if you're feeling good about yourself, you might come home and be a better parent. You might come home and be a better husband. You might come home and decide, no, I am going to go outside and do the lawns today. And then your neighbour's like, oh, I feel like I might do my lawns too. I want to be cool like that. And these things just spiral out of control real fast, right? And that's the kind of beauty about architecture, is that when you look at it from that perspective, yeah, you're doing door schedules and you're doing toilets and you're doing these really boring things on the surface. But when they all come together, they produce things like this, where people are genuinely interacting with these spaces. And often they forget that this is space doing it. And in fact, good architecture is like a good referee. You don't notice they're there because they're actually just letting you be and allowing you to be your best self. And like interior design is great for this because it just makes you feel good. And so I think that's where that human-centric kind of quote comes from, is that even when I'm doing the most boring thing or the most simple thing, I'm thinking about things like, well, yeah, this is a slog and it's been, 30 sketches over the same configuration. We're just going back and forth. But I know that at the end, when this thing is actually built, someone's going to benefit. And if it's one person and that multiplies out to 3 and multiplies out to 9, very quickly it affects a lot of people. And that's the beauty of what we do. And the difficult thing is you've got to remind yourself of it because you don't get to see it. You're not there to watch it.
Yeah, you're stuck behind the fog of lines of different weights on a computer and spreadsheets, as you mentioned.
That's right.
Yeah, and it sounds like, when you describe people dressing up for an environment, it sounds like in a way you're also dressing up for them. You're taking your work seriously and making sure it's an environment that's suitable for, activity.
Yeah.
And then people take people seriously. Oh, that's a weird way to phrase it. If you do something seriously, people take you seriously as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah, absolutely. We did a small thing this is back when Kāinga Ora was housed in New Zealand, and I was working with an architect on a different project. He wasn't on the House New Zealand one. And he was from Germany, and he sort of said, when we're designing spaces for social housing there, we treat people like people. And so he had a real issue with us putting in, or looking at doing stainless steel handrails inside the house. Yeah. Because stainless steel is bulletproof, right? Anyway, so what we did is we managed to convince Kāinga Ora to do one house in a timber handrail. And that was the only handrail that didn't have to be replaced. And it's just down to that level of like, if you feel respected, then you respect back. If you feel like you're being treated in a different way to what you would do if you were in your neighbour's place, then you act differently, And the really wonderful thing about that was that on that job, again, bringing it back to the human component, I was just a graduate. I was an underling. I had no knowledge. So they just sent me out there to survey 30-odd houses, existing houses. And that meant I had to climb under the houses with a colleague. I had to go and look in the roof spaces, and I had to open every window, every door, because we're trying to assess what do we need to replace, what can we keep. But of course, these houses were completely occupied. And so you're going into these houses and you're confronted by people that I had encountered in my life because I live in a different place, in a different community. But what you realize is their needs and their wants are the same. And they are genuinely nice people whose intentions are really good. They just haven't had the same privileges that I've enjoyed. And so I remember there was one family of about 7 living in a 3-bedroom house. They had migrated from somewhere in the Middle East. I don't know if it was refugee or if it was asylum or what it was, but they'd migrated from the Middle East. And you could just see they were all about getting the kids to school. And mum and dad were working all ends, all times, just to make sure they had that fundamental, And I can remember, back to my childhood, because my grandparents are migrants. My parents were all about education, education, education. We didn't get to do the full university thing, but you are. And so, just seeing that in action at a different stage in that life cycle, and you just see things like that everywhere in that community. And it's just about seeing people as people again and recognizing that you're not your worst self. Your worst self is not a representation of who you are. You're actually a lot more than that. And we as architects and designers have to recognize that and design for the full person, design for the full community, which I think's just a lot more exciting, and a lot more positive and uplifting.
Yeah. Sorry, I hope you don't mind if we take a quick break.
No.
I think I might have forgotten to close off one of the windows.
No, you're right. You go for it. Absolutely. No, go for it. Absolutely.
Do that. Yeah, I noticed all the bike sounds as we were talking, and I figured, that's probably something I should get to.
Well, I hate for you to get all the way through and not say anything out of politeness. Yeah. Realise.
Oh, that's an hour interview with noises in the background.
At least it's not like Teams or Zoom where any background noise cuts people off.
Ah, yes, yeah, and it switches your camera angle as well.
It does all kinds of odd things. Yeah.
I guess there's always things I figured there's always things I'm learning every time I'm doing this. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I've got a beautiful question locked and loaded.
You're right.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, go for it.
It sounds like what you're describing is, in a way, and this might be a very crude way of talking about it, but an architect's a professional, stupid person in the room. You're listening and you're trying to learn as much as you can about the people that you're designing for, and then you go, okay, I can see how I can adapt my skills to suit your problems. I may not anticipate what your problems are, but at least now I know what the right questions are to ask you. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the old school architecture kind of view, if you go 200 years ago, it was all about architects as dictators. We are the most intelligent people in this conversation, and we're going to tell you what it is you're going to get. But what you recognize, particularly when you work with more and more people, and this is the beautiful thing about Aotearoa, we've got so many different kinds of people who bring so many different perspectives that you can't really act that way and be successful. I think what you've got to do is get in the room with people and understand what are the specific things that are driving you crazy? What are the things that you're not feeling like you're heard on? And the irony of it is that most of those things are such simple things to address. And then from there, the architect just takes on a journey and does whatever it's going to do. It almost never has much of an impact on the technical side, around weather tightness or fire egress or anything like that. Often it's things as mundane as window locations to allow like a view to the street, or they've got a view that they want to protect out to the sea, or a light switch location, or they can't get down to the ground to reach the power points, so just make them a bit higher. Like it's just like really mundane stuff, but it comes out in these conversations. And then more recently working in aged care, a lot of these things that we're having to talk about aren't even things that are really that building related. They relate to things like maintenance, or they relate to things like operating procedures, which actually the building isn't the right thing to try and use to address that, which again is a great conversation to have with a client, because then you're like, well, actually, let's get the building simple and then put this plan in place to deal with this anyway. So I'll give you an example of that. Part of working in aged care is you've got to recognize that people die. It's just part of what happens, right? We're all going to die one day. And having that conversation in front of a client is quite a good thing, because it helps them to sort of really focus on some of the things that really matter. And when we're dealing with care in particular, which is where you've got people who are typically stuck in their beds or they need a lot of support, they're perhaps closer to the end of life than the start of life. So you've got to recognize that at some point they're going to leave the building. So how do you manage that? Now, aged care demographically is typically like still a Caucasian environment, right? It's changing, but it's still, that's where it sits. As time
Sorry, does that mean that most of the people in aged care facilities are Caucasian?
Typically,
Okay.
yeah. If you take independent living and care and dementia and the whole lot, that's typically where it sits.
Yep.
And so what you've got to then recognise is that demographic is going to change over time. And so the challenge that we've come across with a couple of my clients now is to say, well, if you're planning for that last day for that resident, if they're of a different demographic or different culture, what does that mean? Because some cultures and some communities, because not even, you can't even use like the term culture because it's sort of too broad, but some communities or some individuals don't want people to know that they're gone. They just want to go out the back door as discreetly as possible, like they were never there. There are others who want that chance for people to have the chance to say goodbye, or the chance to celebrate or sing. There are some who want to go out the back door, some who want to go out the front door the way that they came in. There are some who want to go out in the sun, some who want to go out in the shadow. So there's all these different things that go on, but how do you facilitate all those things in a building? Yeah. And if you think about architecture, well, that's multiple corridors, that's secondary accessories, all this other stuff going on. Where when we talked about on one of the more recent prototypes I completed, we sort of decided, well, if we could do this as an operational thing and say, hey, look, here, staff, this is the plan. And then your residents, when they come in, have opportunity, or the families have opportunity to say, no, we want this or we want this. So you can go out the front door and have a celebration, or you can go discreetly out the back door or outside of ours. Well, when we looked at that and said, well, if we do it operationally, all you need to do is add one more door. And that was all it was, because this building has a service corridor. And so what you could do is follow the service corridor all the way out the back. The service corridor happens to pass by the main entry foyer. So by having this extra door, which is double wide, you can get a gurney or anything straight out the front door if you wanted to. So it's just those little things where big concern, very small architectural intervention. So the ramifications of listening to people are actually quite small. And then they feel really important, because they are. And then they see these little things happening in their buildings, and they start to trust you with everything else that's going on. They won't question your capabilities from a weather tightness perspective, or from a structural coordination perspective, or seismic engineering. They trust the team because you're getting the small things right. You know?
And oftentimes the small things are the most important.
Absolutely.
Like you mentioned. Yeah. How do you go about, with different cultures, at least with these projects in particular, how do you go about figuring out what it is that some of them might need? Because in some cases the individual differs a lot more from the group than what you might assume a group has in terms of its needs.
I think this comes from like just constant curiosity. So through interacting with different demographics over time, because I've been doing this 16, 17 years now, you sort of start to get a feel for what some of the concerns might be. So you can make some educated guesses, and so you put them out there as questions. Say, hey, look, would you like, in your culture, do you want to go in death, want to go out the front door? Or do you want to have a celebration? Do you want to go quietly? Do you want to go nighttime? Do you want to go day? So you know to ask these questions. So it's really about growing that awareness, and then they'll fill in those blanks for you. And often you get in those conversations, and there's these different viewpoints that occur as well, even within like a very homogeneous community, so homogeneous community. So then the question is like, how do you then balance all that out? And often it's about, well, how can you do both things? You know, what's the smallest possible intervention into the architecture that you can do that facilitates that? Because ultimately, what we find is that the community or the stakeholders are often not the same people who are paying for the project.
Yep.
So you've got to think very carefully about how do you try and navigate all that space. But it really comes down to being curious.
Yeah.
And I think we might get into this a little bit later on, but I think as a designer, there are two really big things you've got to do to stay curious. And number one is you have to travel. And that can be around the country, that can be around the city, that can be around the world. But what it does is by being in places you haven't been, it forces you to look at it like a new person, and it forces you to engage with things you haven't thought about for a long time. Oh, why is the supermarket laid out this way? You know, or why is the bus going that way and not this way? These subtle little things you start picking up on, which just really kind of start to blow your mind. Why are the plugs different? You know, and you start to kind of get into those things which are just, you can't think about. And by doing that, it challenges your baseline assumptions, which, you know, you get to your early 20s and you've formed some pretty strong opinions on things and never question them. But you have no idea what they are until you're exposed to that. So travel's really good for that. And then also the good thing with travel is often you're going to places where you can't speak the language. And not being able to speak the language makes you feel what people trying to learn English feel. And you just recognize that actually behind that person who's trying to learn this new language is a caring, intelligent, smart person who just hasn't yet got that ability to communicate, because that's the position you're in when you go traveling, right? So as a designer, those are really powerful things. It helps you then break that barrier down and be like, well, how do I navigate this space from like a genuine place of curiosity? No. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing I'd say is that we're so like device ridden, where we stick to our devices so much, whether it be our phones or our computers or whatever. But what they don't give us is, again, perspective. And this is where I'm a really big advocate for just reading. It doesn't matter what you read, whether it's like a rom-com or a trashy novel, whether they're like books about leadership, doesn't matter. Just read. Because what it does, and I'm a believer that fiction's better than non-fiction, because what it does is it puts you into positions where you've got to see people making decisions based on their perspectives, how they see the world from their shoes. And that then challenges you, because often you're reading these things and you're thinking, why the heck is this person doing this? I would never do this kind of thing. And that stops you in your tracks, because you're like, hang on, but this person, it's completely logical because of who they are. So I think that's where that comes from, is you've got to try and keep that level of perspective going. And if you rely on project work to do that for you, projects are too slow. So you won't get that constant challenge that you need. And I think particularly if you're like a budding young designer and you want to go a long way, I think those two things, if you can build them into your lifestyle somehow, it doesn't have to be extravagant. It could just be, go and camp up at, Tiaro Point or something, just get out there and do something different. It's just about breaking routine, allowing yourself to grow that awareness and understand that what you think you know is actually a lot smaller than what you don't know.
What are some of your assumptions that have been challenged through travel and reading?
Yeah, goodness, there's so many. A lot of them come from, the things you hear as a kid when you're around like your family and, you're all around like your school buddies or whatever, and you've grown up in a certain environment and you're like at a barbecue or whatever and someone says something and the 40-year-old me knows that that thing was racist or sexist or whatever it was, but the 12-year-old version doesn't. And so you go traveling and you start seeing things and you're like, oh, hang on, that's actually okay. Why do I feel a bit weird about what I'm seeing right now, Why am I finding this thing so confronting? And the example I can think of off the top of my head was I was traveling through Mexico. This is before I met my wife, so I was on my own. And we're in a small town, and there are always little boys holding hands. They must have been like 10, 12. And in my head, at that time I must have been early 20s, I'm like, I would never hold a boy's hand. I'm a boy, my friends are boys, we don't hold hands. That's so weird. But in seeing it, I'm like, well, hang on, why is that so weird? Like, what's so strange about that? And now I'm a dad. Like, I watch my kids and they're holding hands with everybody all the time. And I look at it, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. They're friends and they're being friendly and that's great, keep doing that, And I don't feel weird when my son holds my hand. So you start sort of going back and you're like, well, actually, just because I didn't do something doesn't mean it's weird. It's just, that's the environment I was in, So I remember that one quite vividly because I remember walking down the street and one of the girls, I was on a bus tour, and one of the girls we were talking about it and she's like, yeah, that's not that weird. And I think she had been to Bangladesh or somewhere more recently and seen the same sort of thing going on. But yeah, it's just kind of getting over yourself a little bit and recognizing, oh, there's no real good foundation for that belief or that idea. And just being open to that. And if I hadn't traveled, they wouldn't have been put in that position to kind of think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of what you're doing through exposing yourself to those experiences is unlearning what you thought were givens of life.
Yeah.
And I want to say challenging assumptions, but in a way that sounds a little cheesy to say.
Yeah.
But I guess
but
it is.
That is what it is, though.
Yeah.
That is what it is.
Yeah, that's why it's, I guess, in a way overused, is because it is a universal insight.
Yeah.
You mentioned something that I thought was very revealing to me. You said, I'm recognizing that the smallest changes in your own individual environment has such a huge impact on what you project out into the world. Can you explore that for me?
Yeah, goodness. Yeah. Where do I start with something like that? It's trying to remove those points of failure, right? So you think about the last time you thought, you're on Instagram or something and you see someone doing some amazing bit of art. You're like, I want to give that a go. I'm going to try that. And so you go down to the art shop, supply shop, you pick up all your bits and bobs. Your generation when you might order it all online. But you get the stuff and it arrives and it's sitting there and it's ready to go, but you don't do anything about it. And then you think, okay, well, maybe if I take this all out and I put it on a desk so it's ready for me, so I can just like literally duck in and do it. And you do that and it still doesn't happen. You keep walking past that desk. You don't ever sit down there and do it. A lot of that's just down to the fact that you haven't created an environment that's setting you up to succeed. The failure point in those situations is that there's always something else to do. It's sort of the psychology behind why gyms are so successful, because having to go to somewhere to work out, for most of us, when you have a choice, is much more effective because now you've made a commitment, right? Whereas working out at home in your garage is a lot harder, right? People who do that, I've managed to get better at that now, it's because I have no choice. I've got my kids around, I want to be around them, and I don't want to make the gym into an hour-long, 2-hour-long round trip. So it's a small change in your environment that can change some of those things. So if you imagine that desk now with all your stuff, what if that was at your mate's house? So suddenly it's intention. It's like, no, on Tuesday, I've called my mate. He knows I'm going to come over there. He's not going to be home. He's given me a key to his house. So I'm going to go in there. I'm going to sit there and do it. And the second you walk out that door, you've got intention, right? So it's about trying to remove obstacles. That's what I'm trying to say. You're trying to create an environment where you don't have those obstacles to doing the things you really want to do. And so in architecture, the clearest example I can think of is that if you I've got a village we just finished up in Hobsonville, and there are lots of these ground level apartments, right? And the village encourages people to get pets. And if you've got a dog, bring them, why not? And there's these 4 ground level units with these glass balustrades, and we're looking at them in plan. So I think the concrete had been poured. And we're like, hang on a minute, what if we could just make one of the balustrades a gate? So then it just makes it easier for the resident to get out and walk their dog, or get out and be about. And that's when I jumped in and said, look, we have to do it. And the reason you have to do it is by making it easy, you're encouraging people to make it happen. As soon as there's the obstacle, I've got to go back out the front door, down the corridor, out the main entry gate. What if the dog has a wee? What if something goes wrong in the meantime? You're creating opportunities to say, no, I'm not going to do it, right? So in the same way as you going down the road to your mate's house to use their desk, this is operating in a similar sort of fashion. By having the gate there, you've removed the point of failure. And so in architecture, we can do this all the time, where we sort of say, well, how do we make this into something that you want to do? How do we make this something that you can integrate into your lifestyle? How we remove those barriers. A simple thing with the power plugs could be you've got a bad back. And so by putting it a little bit higher, maybe you choose to vacuum more often, and therefore you feel good about your house being clean and tidy. You don't have to stress when your mum comes over for dinner because your house is a tip. Well, actually, I know I can vacuum quickly if I need to, or I know that I vacuumed in the last week because it's easy. So it's those little things you've got to switch your head around. And actually the big architectural stuff that we tend to focus on, in a bulk and location type of sense, that's got a very different purpose. Yeah.
Do you manage your personal work environment as well in the same way? And the way you structure your life? Are there ways that you make decisions easier, work more productive for yourself as well?
Yeah, so I try to make sure that, in terms of my work setup, it's got to be a place I want to be.
Yep.
That's number one with the bullet. And I'm really lucky that with me and my colleague Anna, we sort of do a lot of the hiring in our studio as well. So then we get to bring people in who challenge us, or who have got like a good energy, or have a great backstory, or bring something unusual, which makes them into like really lively colleagues to have. And then on top of that, it's the physical side of it. So for me, standing up, because I tend to be doing a lot of talking and moving around or whatever, standing up is just the best way to just maintain that level of like agility. So I've got a standing desk which has been more or less unplugged for the last 4 years, because I just set it at a height and that's it. I don't want to go down, I don't want to sit. And I've got the same thing set up at home, because it's just like I want to have that same energy. If I'm doing the work thing, it's got to be matching or resonating with the frequency I'm putting out. And so I think that's about that awareness or ability to try, because that came from at S&T we had some partitions down this long corridor in the middle of our office. And at some point we decided we don't need these partitions anymore, we should just open the floor plate up. So we took some of them down and we're like, hey, these can make cool tables. When we made the tables, one of the guys said, well, let's make them taller. So we did that. And then I was like, well, I don't actually need a stool because I'm the right height, just being short. That actually the tall height's probably about right for me to stand at. So I gave that a whirl, and then the initial thing I noticed, and this comes down again to just trying something and not being afraid to try. But what I noticed is that there was a meeting I used to have once a week. It was a regular meeting, and it would often end up at a pub, and you'd have a burger, fries, and a beer. And you'd come back at like 2 o'clock, and you'd sit at your desk and just start to like and before you know it, you're asleep on your keyboard. Like that's the energy you've got. So the standing desk removed all of that, because suddenly you're back to your desk and you're still moving and you're up and your food's digesting and you're feeling good. And so it didn't have the same impact. And so I'm looking at my colleagues all fade and I'm feeling really good. And so it's about trying to pick up some of those things. And that's the attitude of just trying stuff and not being afraid to give it a whirl. Because once you've tried it, you figure out if it works for you or not, and then you either keep going or you move on. But it's that attitude of trying to find those efficiencies, find those things that just help to make everything you're doing a bit easier, a bit more enjoyable. And for me, I'm fidgety, I'm struggling to sit still here. Just having that ability to move and be in my body is like a really big thing.
Yeah, well, I'm the same way. You might have seen that. I've moved my hands around quite a bit. It's that perennial question of where do I place my hands in the selfie?
Yes.
What do I do?
Yeah.
But how do you begin to find those qualities in the people that you're looking for? How do you spot the hunger and the curiosity when you're out hiring?
Yeah, so it's funny. So if you think about when one day you're going to do like a kitchen refurb, or you're going to want to do your bathroom up or something, and if you're like me, you're not particularly brave, so you're not going to do it yourself. Okay, if you are, hey, full credit to you. I'm full of admiration of your courage, because it's just something I'm not brave enough to do.
Well, you're risking your back as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so, so what I would do is I would go and say, okay, can I find like a bathroom supplier or a kitchen supplier and get them to do the whole lot for me? And then what you do is when you go through that process, price will be a big factor. Let's say you go to 3 different suppliers. Price will be a big factor. But very close second will be like, how do I feel when I'm talking to these people?
Yeah.
You know, are they easy to talk to? Do they pick up the phone and call me? Do they communicate in a way that I find appropriate? Am I waiting for them all the time? Are they unclear? Are they, et cetera, et cetera. So when you think about that, Anna and I have taken the view with our teams to be like, well, if we assume that there's a set of skills that they're going to have, broadly speaking, usually there'll be some CAD software skills, there'll be some design skills, there'll be some technical skills, that stuff, coordination skills. Okay, we'll assume there's some level of those, and those are things we do all the time, so we can train people if we have to. What I can't train is being engaging. I can't train people to be courteous. I can't train people to be kind and thoughtful or empathetic. I can't train people to be disciplined. I can't train people to have passion, right? So then Anna and I, when we ask questions in an interview, our first questions are always things like, so what do you do on the weekend? What are you doing after this? Tell us like the last time you went on a big trip and where'd you want to go? Where'd you go? What'd you see? Because actually that tells us a lot more about a person, because usually what that reveals is things like they'll talk about their hobbies. Oh yeah, I've been an Olympic style fencer for like 25 years. You're like, oh, that's that shows me lots of things, like you're committed, you got something a little bit interesting that you can talk about, and then when they start talking about that, because in an interview setting, I'm typically going to be as knowledgeable as the person, if not more, across the table from me, right? So for them to try to talk to me at the same level about architecture is going to be quite tough. However, if you're talking about your passion, which I know nothing about, juggling, speed juggling, Rubik's cubes, whatever it is, like you're going to be able to compel me to be like, oh man, yeah, Yasha's got this real like sense about him and discipline and interest, and he's thought about from all these different angles, and this is really great. And if he can apply this to architecture, hey, happy days. But I can't teach the first bit. I can't train you for that. And so it's about trying to get that information out of people. What is it you're doing? Why are you, what makes you tick? And because I'm also a big believer that it's nice if architecture and design is your passion, but I would argue for most people it's not. It's just something you're really good at. So therefore you've kept going. You're either good at drawing at school, or you like CAD software, or you like production, or you like dealing with people. So then it's like, well, if it's not your passion, then how do we bring some of that energy in the front door when you come in? How do we bring that somehow, And so if you like being in front of people, how do we get you in front of people? How can you do that stuff? If you like graphic design, okay, how can you get involved with our marketing and branding a bit more, alongside your day-to-day doing doors and toilets and everything else? So it's about getting to that space. It's about sort of getting to people's heads to be like, well, I don't care what jobs you've worked on. I don't care what projects you've done. I don't care what software you can use. I can read that off a piece of paper. What can I get from talking to you that tells me more?
Yeah.
So that's where we get into those spaces. And so very often, we've had one interview, in fact, where we hired the person, and afterwards she said to me, well, you didn't ask me any questions about my history. I'm like, well, no, you sent me that before. And we were basically now in a conversation. I told her the interview was really about us deciding whether you were a person we wanted to have around the office, because we already decided that you were capable. And that's the way you've got to look at it. You've got to say, well, what kind of atmosphere am I trying to create? Because there's a bunch of stuff, as I said, you can train people on, and you can give them coaching and tutorials and whatever. But there's some stuff you can't train. So how do you pick, what things do you really want for your practice or for your group of people? Try and find those things and then train the rest.
Yeah, I was speaking to Bill Mackay. This conversation was probably a few months ago.
Yeah.
And he said the way he decides who he wants to work with is the people that he gets along with. And he says, can I handle being in a room, or even better, do I want to be in a room with you for 8 to maybe 12 hours a day at points, 5 to even 7 days a week? And is that going to be pleasurable? Is that going to be a lovely experience? And then it gets to, okay, the skills are the bare minimum.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that can execute what we require to be executed, and now more and more machines can do that for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's about, I guess that drills to the core of it. Are you passionate about something, and the way that you show up in one thing is often the way that you show up across every other realm.
Great.
So in a way, it sounds like you're using those questions to figure out how they would enact in your firm and around your environments.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned Bill because he was my tutor in 5th year, I think it was, for my design paper. I think it was the first year of doing thesis papers. We did it in a semester. And it was
in a semester as well.
In a semester 2 years. I think it was the first year. So we had a good hack at it. But but what was really cool was that it was my interactions with him were all about that personal kind of component. It was never really about could I make the models or could I do the drawings or could I do. It was actually more about really pushing the edges of my skills or the edges of my my knowledge. And that comes from having people that are passionate. Even back then he was writing in magazines. He was a well-known character on the scene here in Auckland. And so, it just, when you come into contact with people like that, it just inspires you to then lift your own self and think, if I fast forward a bit further forward, I had a mentor when I was getting registered at the practice, and he put a lot of time into just answering my questions and giving me all this time. And then when I finally got registered, I gave him a call and look, hey, what's happened, Paul? I'm registered. And he was like, yeah, it's amazing, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, man, what can I get you? And he's like, you can't do anything for me. He said, there's literally nothing you can do to repay what I've done for you in this period. And I was like, oh, that's a crappy thing to hear. And he then follows up by saying, pay it forward. I was helped to get where I am. Now you did help others get to where you are. And that sticks with me because it's such a lovely sentiment about, and I can't read Bill's mind, but I imagine there's a little bit of that in there as well because just the amount of time and care he put into my interactions with him, that even after all this time, 18 years later, I still remember that, and it's such a visceral thing because you just got to have those connections with people. You've got to have those relationships. You've got to feel genuinely listened to. And it's even more important now because it's such an easy thing to turn off, whether it's with your phone or whether you're on Teams or whatever. It's so easy to seem disinterested. That when you do come across someone who's interested in what you're saying or engaged, man, it just changes your whole day.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? Because and particularly if there's someone you think is important.
Yeah.
Like if you feel like in a dynamic that you're at the low end of the hierarchy because they're successful or they're older or they're just something that you're not yet, and they give you their time, man, you feel great, don't you? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just become even more important over time, and I think those who can really tap into that, like there's a world of opportunity sitting out there for you.
Yeah, yeah, and in a way, it's I guess you're also finding people to celebrate with, and I think you could say that for both the mentor as well as the mentee, which is you might achieve heights of success on your own, but if you get to the end of the day and you say, hey, I just earned a $3 million project on a residential house and I get to take home 15% of it, but I've got no one to celebrate it with. But on the other hand, if you've got a mentor who's guided you through those processes and you've got people around you in a team or even just your family, it suddenly becomes a lot more rewarding and you go, hey, we've been through this process together. You've guided me or I've shown you the path in a way or at least my learnings. You get to the end of it and you say, hey, let's blow out these candles together.
That's right.
And you're so right. It's a lot more visceral in that way. It sticks in your head. And it's not just a thing where you tick off a box that you thought you wanted success, but what you really wanted was probably that connection, that meaningful. Yeah.
But a lot of that comes from just where you've come from or how you've come through your life, right? So I have this incredible privilege where, growing up, my folks are able to provide everything for me and our family. And when it came to things like as simple as going to buy a house, like my wife's an architect too, so we both earn really well. We went to buy a house and then her parents and my parents both kicked in extra money. And, I think it's important I mention this because it's easy for me to talk about the value of all these other things, but that's only because I come from a position where I don't have to worry about the money so tightly. And that's a really important thing to be conscious of because for most of us, that's not a luxury that you have. So then how do you then satisfy the fact that, hey, I've actually got to prioritize keeping the lights on or I've got to prioritize keeping the rent coming or paying my mortgage, particularly if you're at a high interest rate on a big loan. Like those are real things. So what that does in my mind, it says, well, we can't all be doing all things at all times. So therefore, if you're in that position, like contribute where you can, and if that's your focus, that's okay. We understand. And Anna and I often say to our team, look, if you have to go to another practice because they're going to offer you 10K more, we get it. because, you're trying to pay a mortgage, you're trying to save for a house, you're trying to do whatever with your life, and that's a reality. So that's on us who haven't got that same pressure, or as you move through your career and that pressure becomes less because you're paying down your debts or you've moved past your student loan or whatever, to then bring that into the room and be the people who are the vehicles for that.
Yeah.
So then you can see that, hopefully there's a point in everyone's professional career where you can move into that second box. We used to go from being, I've got some fundamental needs I need to achieve here, to being, how can I change the world? And what can I do in that space? And then having people around you that have already made that step to say, actually, yeah, you can be about experience, you can be about interaction, connection, you can be about influencing how people's lives are led.
Yeah.
So it's important that we kind of quantify that, because it's really easy for me to say it, but then someone who's one of the 10 people who are watching this will go away and be like, but I can't afford to do this.
Yeah.
And that's a reality. It's really important to be mindful of that we don't all come from that same place. And so grandparents left India, so effectively I'm second generation here. And so that comes with a set of, I think, privileges because of the embedded motivation to work and the motivation to get an education and do lots of fundamental things like that, which not everybody has.
Yeah. So you became a father 4 years ago?
5 years ago. My daughter's turning 6 this year.
Yeah. Talk to me about how that's changed your perspective on everything that we've just talked about.
Yeah, it's wild. It is wild. And I think it's even more wild because my wife's an architect as well.
Yeah.
And so part of our whole conversation or our whole challenge has been thinking about how do we make sure that we keep both of our careers progressing, because that's important to both of us. It changed things for us and changed things for me because of how strong my wife is. Like, she's like an inspiration in so many different ways, because she wouldn't let me just fall into my assumptions or fall into my stereotypes. When we were first talking about how things would work after Anya was born, and in my head it was like, oh, Tisha will be home for 12 months, I'll go to work or do whatever society says. And then Tisha was like, well, but for you to be off for 6 months is not really a big deal for you as a male in our profession.
Yep.
But for me to be off for 12 months is a massive deal. So where we ended up is that she was off for the first 6 months, and then I was off for the next 6 months. Best decision that I want to say I ever made, but it wasn't, that we ever made, because we did it together. Because what it did is it made me realize just how important it is to have your priorities in the right places, and it was awful for Tisha in hindsight, because I got to see the sitting up and the walking and the crawling and all that stuff happened when I was at home with my daughter. But what it also meant is I got to feel what it was like to have to let go of all my projects and come back not knowing if these things I'd carefully nurtured and looked after, the relationships that I treasured, would still be there or be mine again, because you just don't know. And these are things that mothers confront all the time. So that was like a really visceral thing to go back into, and have that sense of, am I as important as I think I am? Am I as good as I think I am? And have to confront all those things because you've spent 6 months, baby talk in diapers and singing the Wiggles and the Beatles and all those things that we do as a parent. And so that's quite a confronting thing. But then it also helps you to recognize just how insane it is. It's insane how good people are when they are working and they are parents, because they're just, particularly when kids are young, they're juggling so many different things, and they've got to keep everything, all the plates have to keep spinning. You've got to keep the work going at work, you've got to keep the kids healthy, you've got to keep investing in the kids in terms of their reading and playing and all those things, and at home nothing goes to plan. The kid changes their mind and that's it. You've got to then change your mind. You can't, there's no routine as such. It takes a long time to build that up.
You can't be a project manager at home.
Not at all, no. All your skills running a job don't work, because anything you learn 2 weeks later, it's obsolete again. You've got to start again. But at the same time, it's quite cool because it helps you to become more agile and recognize when something needs to stop and you need to do something differently, which is no different to what I do in the office now with my team, where, the old kind of thinking was that your employees are your employees and they're there to do a job and you're there to do a job and that's sort of it. But when you understand how they're wired and you take the time to understand what's going on in their lives, and I can't fix it. I can't fix anything going on, but if I show that little bit of empathy, a little bit of understanding, then what they do, which is sensational, like I don't understand how it quite works, is they'll turn around and do things like, sorry, Raj, I've got to go today. I've got to deal with my dishwasher. It's not working. Can I just go? I'm like, just go. We'll deal with it later. But when it comes back and, in their head, they're counting the hours, and I never have to do that because I know they're going to give me back whatever they say they've taken. But I look back at the timesheets afterwards and they're giving me like 2 or 3 or 4 extra hours. And I'm like, but why? And then often when you get into like the conversations over a beer or over a coffee with them, it's like, well, because we just appreciate the fact that we didn't have to explain ourselves or wait for you to be in the office to go home, or all those little subtle things. Again, it's like those points of failure. There's those little things that you do. So I mean, that was a big thing that came out from that initial stint at home with my daughter, was that you just realize that you've got to learn to roll with things a bit more and just take things based on like your core values and not get too wrapped up in the process sometimes, because everybody understands. This is the irony of it. As a father, half my clients are fathers. And so if I call them and say, sorry, I can't make the meeting, my kid's sick, their first thought is, oh yeah, sweet, we'll reschedule, don't even worry about it.
Yeah, that's what they would do as well.
Exactly, but you don't know that till you start making those phone calls. Yeah. And they're like, why are you calling me? Just go and text me later on. We don't need to talk, get off the phone, get in the car. But it's just that bringing that human part into what we do and recognizing that we are humans and that we have these things we need to juggle. That's been huge, I think.
Yeah, everyone that I know who's a father has always said this, has always made this one very common observation, which is becoming a father makes you care a lot more and changes the way you see the world in a way, because all of a sudden you have a real, much more visceral stake in it. Has that been true for you as well? No,
I don't think so. And I think it's because I'm wired a little bit like my mum. So as kids, my mum was always, think about your impact on the world, think about what you're doing for others, think about your actions, not what other people do, because ultimately you can't control them, but do what you can to control the world. And that sort of perspective, it's about self-responsibility, it's about putting out there what you want to get from the world, all that sort of stuff. And so I think even before having kids, that was always like a front of mind type thing.
You were in a fatherly mindset before that.
Kind of, yeah, like a parent, yeah, sort of like and I think that came through at school where, I had this really great friend circle who I love to bits, and I'm in contact with almost all of them still. And what you recognize is that they are your sounding board. They are the thing that keeps you on the straight and narrow. They will call you on your rubbish. They will, help you along. And what that kind of does is it helps you to see them as people as well, because often you get dragged into their messy lives. I've got my messes and they've had their messes and we go back and forth. But in trying to work together through these things, you kind of recognize that that's the way that things have to be. You've got to be thinking, well, it's easy for me to say to person X, oh, I'll just harden up and do this and blah, blah, blah. But actually, that's coming from me in my shoes. But, if I go back to some of the things my mum and dad got into me when I was a kid, and for whatever reason stuck with me, I kind of apply that to my mates. And so if I go back to some of the things we were dealing with in high school, that's what I'm now 40, and that was back when I was 15, so that's 25 years ago, right? So these things were ingrained in my thinking long before then. And then I think through things like, I used to play a lot of cricket and I was captain of a lot of sides and stuff, and while I was a pretty average player, I was pretty good at getting the best out of my guys. And largely that came down to just understanding that people are just people. And sometimes guys just don't want to play. Or sometimes there are other things that are just more important. And you just recognize that and you start to give everything like a real sense of real value and real weight. So then bringing it into being a parent, it didn't seem, at least to me, that part wasn't that confronting. The lack of control was completely confronting because you're at someone else's behest and your schedules are all over the place. But in terms of the empathy side, I think that was already there. That was already part of my thinking, because I thought, back in those cricket days, I thought, look, if I can find the right way to talk to this person, then I'm going to get the best result for the team out of this. And so very early on, I think I saw that just treating people well and making them feel heard leads to like better efficiency, leads to better results, leads to just a happier environment, leads to a place that people want to go. And you put those things together and they just compound on top of each other all the time. And that's not unique to a cricket field. That applies on a soccer field, it applies at home, it applies with your relationships, it applies with work, it's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes, this might just be more of a Western country thing, but oftentimes in people's minds, the idea of success is a number on a bank account
Yeah.
or a position or a title in their life. And it doesn't sound like that was the case even through your early life. What has career progression meant to you early on? Have you always had that caring aspect integrated within it, and how has it changed over the course of?
Yeah, it's kind of always been there because when I first started working, I ended up doing 3 years at the Auckland International Airport and the domestic terminal, and it was great. You just learn so much stuff. But the thing that was quite difficult for me, because by nature I'm on the softer side of the continuum, you're dealing with some hard, rugged guys, right? You really are, and it was really cool because it reminded me of who I was, and they were awesome. Don't get me wrong, they were all fantastic people, and so many of them showed me a lot of kindness and time to help me figure out what I didn't know, because I didn't know a lot. But I think that helps to give me a sense of like who I am and my value, and I've seen over time that I can work with people who are anywhere on that continuum, no matter where they are. And so you kind of need different kinds of people, because a lot of people like me doesn't work, but a lot of people like them don't work either. You need to have that tension. There's a healthy tension that occurs. Yeah.
What are some of the traps that you think you've either fallen into or avoided through the course of your career development, whether it be through those personality dimensions or otherwise?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, I think, is when you're there's probably two sides. So when you're a leader, this German mentor of mine, he once said to me that successes are your team's and failures are your own. And that's the way you need to carry it. So whenever like something good happens for a project, you celebrate the whole team. It's everybody. But as a leader, if something goes wrong, that's you. It's not for you to pass on to your team. Like there's a learning, an opportunity to learn something through that and to share some knowledge and help them grow. But it's not about you dumping on them, because ultimately if you're the leader, the buck stops with you. You should have known. You should have checked. You should have asked the right questions, but you didn't. And so that's a big one for me, I think, is making sure that you control that very carefully and recognize that, particularly in construction where time is expensive. And if you're on site and you take too long to do something, you can very quickly get into tens of thousands of dollars in costs. So if your goal is to mitigate that, then your next thing should be, how can I get the job done the fastest? How can I get the drawing updated? How can I get the technical part resolved? Whatever it is, the fastest. And the best way to do that is to make someone feel good about themselves. It's not to turn around and say, you did a shit job, you got that wrong, what are you doing with your life, blah, 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 which would probably, unfortunately, in my time, I've seen that, and it's an awful thing. It just destabilizes everybody. You start second-guessing yourself. You don't ask as many questions. It doesn't. If your goal is to reduce the risk of a big variation, that's not helping you do that. The best thing for me to do is say, hey, look, we've got this issue to resolve. We'll come back and look at what happened later on and work through that in a workshop. But right now, here's what I think we need to do. Yeah. And then you work through it together. And so, hey, guys, I need you to report back to me every 2 hours on what you've done. If you're getting stuck anywhere, I need to know. And that way you're now, as the leader, jumping in to help troubleshoot your way to the solution as fast as you can without making people feel bad about themselves. Because usually what happens when you go back and look at it and you sit down together and talk earnestly, which again is something you've got to build up over time, the ability to talk earnestly, what you find out is that someone's done 10 steps and 9 of the steps are correct, but step number 6 is wrong. And that's just taking things off. And again, as a leader, I say, well, I should have seen that, or I could have caught that. But the value to the client, and this is what comes out, the value to the client is that they see, because the first phone call I'll make in a situation like that is to my client and say, look, hey, there's this thing, it's looking a bit dicey, I'll call you back in 48 hours and let you know where we're at. Right? So then they're already aware that something's going on. But 9 times out of 10, I call them in 48 hours and say, hey, sorry, false alarm, no issues here, just keep going. And what you're doing is you're actually putting up trust through that. And then that one time you call back and say, look, hey, I've got this thing, I don't think I can make this one go away. They're like, right, okay, how can we get in here, Raj, and help you out with this? What can we do? Who do we need to call in? Let's get on Teams right now. Let's get a meeting on site. Just da-da-da-da-da. And that's where it all comes together, because people then want to work with you. They want to help you.
Yeah.
You know, so it's the whole attitude of whatever you do anywhere, how you do any one thing is how you do everything.
Yeah, and especially how you treat other people and make them feel. I think making other people a priority and making them feel heard is a very difficult skill to pick up.
Yeah.
I think people often assume that it's just something that comes naturally to you, or it doesn't, but I think it's something that you can develop. Robert Greene, the author, in one of his books, talked about when Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone were competing for to become the Prime Minister in the UK. They both went out to dinner with a member of the royal family at that time, so both on consecutive nights.
Yeah.
And this member of the royal family, she came back after a dinner with Gladstone and said, Gladstone was amazing. I felt as though he was the most special man in all of the UK. And the next night she goes out for dinner with Disraeli and asks him about what his visions for the UK are. And she comes back and she says, Disraeli was great. I felt as though I was the most special woman in all of the United Kingdom, in all of the world.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's about making people feel special as well, very authentically, of course,
yeah, absolutely.
and recognizing what they've done. And it sounds like that's something that's been at the forefront of your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes from that, to go back to that mentor, Paul, who said, you know, pay it forward. Like what he did for me, and there were others around that time too, but he was maybe one of the most key ones, is he just made me feel important. And, you know, I reflect upon it and I'm like, I didn't really know what I was doing. Because I was 2 or 3 years out of university when I first started really working with him on a day-to-day. And he would always ask me things like, oh, so when are you going snowboarding next? Or how was did you watch the cricket on the weekend, or whatever. Like he took such an interest in everything else I was doing. And then and every conversation would be, 10 minutes long. The first 7 minutes would be some other life thing. And then there'd be like a minute of correcting me on something. Oh, hey, Raj, you need to be aware of this and this and this and this, blah, blah, blah. Do it this way next time. And then it'd be like, that thing you did was really cool. Let's do this. And he'd leave me with some anecdote or whatever. But you always felt really good. And then I'd be driving home or walking home, I'd be like, oh, he actually kind of told me off in the middle of that.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like rubbish. And the next day I'm like, no, I want to work harder for this guy. I actually want to work with this guy. And my reaction to that was to go and ask him more questions and go and see him more often, And even that was back when that office had these glass offices on one side of the big rectangular floor plate, and all the directors sat in those. So you had to actually go over there. And most of the time had their doors open, but it was still intimidating to have to go and do that, particularly as like a 25, 26-year-old. But because of those actions out the other way, it never felt scary. And there were even times I could see that he was not happy. Not specifically with me, but just not happy. But I never felt afraid to go and talk to him even then, because he'd created that environment where just through like his sort of relaxed, kind of silly nature, it just made me feel like I could do that. And that's what I want to create elsewhere, because what I recognize over time, because I worked with a lot of different project leads and a lot of different directors, and both at Chow Hill and back at S&T, what I realized was that was the one that I felt like I learned the most from. And then I think about all my pre-Chow Hill projects, or my favorite ones, they were all with him. And they weren't necessarily the most glamorous ones either. It was just like, he gave me autonomy, or he gave me some direction, or he gave me just something, He made me see the opportunity in this really boring thing. It was just something, and if I was able to go back and measure the time he spent with me, it was probably like minutes. Like it wasn't even like sitting down with me for hours on end. But when he gave me those minutes, like I felt really important.
Yeah.
So I think there's something in that, which I think, again, coming back to like the use of devices and the ability for us to disconnect from people, I think it's something, if you can do it and take the time to do it, you can make people feel really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we draw this conversation back to when we spoke about fatherhood and the way you structure your day. And I see a real connection from what we were just talking about, which is, I guess, finding the frequency that people are on and then finding a way to align yourself to that in a leadership position as yourself, and being a father as well. Do you see a connection in that? It sort of seems like what you're doing is anticipating where people are and what their problems and opportunities are within their life, and going, hey, I see that, but this is what we're doing, and this is how. Sorry, this question might not be the best phrase, but these are areas that I've just begun to
I see where you're kind of coming from. I think what I've learned is try and stay in the moment a lot.
Yep.
So while I might have like an overall goal, and whether that be to get a set of drawings out by a certain time or just get the kids out the door in the next 10 minutes, like you've got to keep your eyes on two things. One is, where am I trying to get to?
Yep.
And then two, how are these people going to get me to there? And the thing you've got to let go of is the roadmap from here to there. Because, if I presented you with a project or a task, and I said to you, look, this is how we're going to do it. I need you to do it by Friday. I'll see you later. And you'll go and try and do it, but it might be done in the way that I would imagine doing it, using some archaic, ancient software package or something that doesn't really resonate with how you work day to day. Or you could be wired completely differently and just want to do things in a completely different way, but achieve the same result. So do I really care how you do it if the result's the same? Not really. So therefore it's about saying, well, if I can stay in the moment with you and be like, yeah, this is how you work, and this is, your process has lots of pencils and lots of pens, or your process is to get straight into SketchUp, or you wanted to sit there and talk about it for an hour before you get started with it, or whatever, or you want me to just give you 2 minutes and leave you alone and come see me in 20 minutes, whatever your process is. Do I really care as long as I get to that solution? And often I'll have the solution and a timeline on it, and people will deliver in less time, or they'll deliver something better because they've been allowed to do it their own way. And it's the same thing like with dealing with kids, getting them out the front door. This is like a quintessential, sitcom type thing, where
with the laugh tracks, of course.
Yeah, laugh tracks and the whole lot. Yeah, and often it's my wife laughing at me in the back of the shop. But it's in my mind, it's like put your shoes on, put your hat on, get your drink bottle, go out the door. But today they're like, no, I want to fill up my drink bottle first. I'm gonna take my pants off before I put my shoes on, and all this other stuff goes on. You're like, well, okay, if this is what you want to do, let's just do it. And as long as my energy is not putting them off doing the general thing, they'll get there. And more often than not, they do. It's just they're not doing it in the order that I would do it in, which is okay. And part of that's also recognizing, and this is the same for kids as it is for professionals, sometimes we've got to explore a little to figure out what the best way might be. With kids going out the front door, you might think, well, there's only one way to do that. But for them, they haven't done it enough times to know that yet. And the same thing happens professionally. Yeah, I might be asking you for a drawing of a concept for a toilet, but if you haven't done it enough times, or in this particular situation or this scenario, well, maybe doing some exploration is not a bad thing. Going through your process of, are you going to jump online and look at toilets? Are you going to look at some old drawings? Are you going to draw some yourself? Are you going to go and look at the toilet in the building and figure it out from there? You're going to go to the code? There's so many different ways you can tackle that.
Yeah. So you're measuring the outcome, not exactly the process, and you're seeing, has the spirit of the opportunity or the problem it had been captured within the outcome.
Yeah.
But then in a way you're trusting, is that the right word to use? You're trusting that this person's a rational adult or a child in some situations, and they will find a way to get there.
Correct. And you build up over time. So what you do is with a younger grad, you might spend a bit more time to help work through, and you might check in more regularly to help them get on the right path and find the right resources, connect them with the right people to talk to. But as you get more experience, or if you've worked with them enough, you just know that they're going to be able to do this on their own, or they'll check in with you as you say. Yep. We've got to do a shop touring review for a job right now, and there's the typical project lead is not in the country. Sorry, he's not in the office, he's at down country. And so I'm managing this with one of the technical staff, and he's been looking at this job quite a bit. And so I've just said to him, look, can you look through these drawings? Tell me if you think you can do the first cut, and then let's catch up tomorrow morning and work through it together. And what I'm confident of is that he will do his absolute darndest, and because I've worked with him a lot, I've got a sense for where he might get to and how he might get there. So it's that building up that relationship, it's building up your knowledge of them, it's staying in the moment to recognise that how they're feeling today, what have they learned in the last month, what are their general gaps that they've got, have they got any blind spots, have they got any real strengths? And you put it together and you get a real sense for what they might come up with.
It sounds like a very similar approach that you take towards clients as well, which is, hey, I'm going to listen to what you have to say and get a lot of the seemingly small things right, like the placement of light switches or the way they organize their rooms and back and front entrances. And that develops a reputation, maybe is a word that you could use, of you with that person or of them with you.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, I trust this person's going to get it right.
That's right.
Either end.
Yeah. I mean, that comes back to that whole idea of the more you do something, the better you get at it. And then on top of it, if you're doing it all the time, then you won't make an obvious mistake. So I guess there's two parts. The first bit is like, you know, on paper, if you have two kids, one who plays football 5 times a week and one who plays 4 times a week, over the course of the year, the one who plays 5 times a week is probably going to be better. Probably, all things on balance, because they spent more time on it, right? And then the second part of it is that if you are nice to everyone as your first instinct, then when it comes to a situation where you really need to pull upon that skill, you're going to be ready. You know, so if you're nice to your kids, to your partner, to your family, to your friends, to your colleagues, that one time where you're blindsided on the bus because a client just walked in and starts talking to you, you're probably going to say the right thing. Because all these other times you've said the right things. You know to look for the cues, you know how to listen, you know how to seem interested, you know how to say that nice. You know, that's a practice.
It's also what you genuinely care about as well, because you wouldn't do those amount of reps if you weren't authentically invested in that project.
That's right. That's exactly it. And so like it's just applying that across the board. And I think this is where we often under pressure lose sight of that in our professional practice in particular, where we sort of say, well, client's not happy with me, right? So now I'm going to go be unhappy with other people. Or I'm stressed about making a good impression with this client who's actually genuinely pretty happy, so I'm going to then take that out on my team around me. And I get nervous about that because I think to myself, if you can't see that these people have got challenges or concerns, then are you going to be as attuned when it comes to a client? You know, and clients are people too. They can pick up on when you're being genuine or not. They can pick up on whether you actually care or not. And so it's a thing. I don't think you can turn on and off as easily as you might think, because we know it works the other way around. If you are, you know, the studies are out there. If you are awful at work or have a bad day at work, you're more likely, or stressed at work, you're more likely to be stressed out with your family. Yeah, that's a pretty simple thing to. Yeah. So if you think about your work day, if you're stressed at work and then the next day you've got to go see your client, well, you might carry that same energy over to there.
And your family in between.
Of course.
Yeah.
So you've got to think about the whole continuum of like, well, how do I try and mitigate all these things down? And there's no one thing you can do. There's lots of little things. And then it's a discipline to kind of keep doing those things. Yeah.
Well, interestingly enough, that's the very definition of words like compassionate or being brave or being considerate, which is you might feel stressed out in the moment, but if you do the things that would make someone compassionate, but then by definition you are compassionate and considering, if you might feel incredibly stressed out and every cell in your body might say, hey, take it out on this person. But if you don't and you say, okay, let me just step back and get a bit of perspective, then by definition you are caring and you're taking into account what's going on. So in a way, it doesn't matter what you're feeling in the moment as long as you self-correct.
It's a hard thing to tell yourself though, because you know you'll have times where you get off a phone call. It's often a phone call which is the worst, because it's the whole kind of cutting off of contact straight away, and you haven't had a chance to ask the right question of a client or a loved one or whoever, but they've had a go at you or they're not happy about something, and you just don't have the chance to kind of qualify it or give it some context or whatever. So when that happens, it's really easy for you to react at the next person you see, whoever they are. And so it's really hard to get yourself that sense of time. But I think what's cool as you get older is that you start being able to, if you force yourself, you can kind of say, right, Rajan, you've been in something like this before, and the other 100 times you've more or less figured your way out. 90 times you've done okay, 7 or 8 times it's been a bit of a mess, 1 time was a real mess up. But most of the time you figure it out. So trust that you're going to figure this one out as well. And often for me, just giving myself the time to say that, and often for me if it's at work, and even at home, it'll be me getting outside to just get some space. And often if I'm at home, it's about, hey kids, let's go for a scooter ride. Let's get out in the backyard. And if I'm at work, it's a lap around Newmarket. But it's just that moment, just enough time for me to go, right, okay, done this before, it's going to be okay. Just work your way through it. Who are the first people you need to talk to try and work your way through? And that's the beautiful thing about having that mechanism that slows you down, is that you start to become more comfortable with how you're feeling, and then more comfortable sharing that with people. And when you're vulnerable with people, they often, if you have any strength in the relationship, they'll jump on you straight away and be like, how can I help? What can I do? And they'll sit with you and they'll say things like it's not you. And then you're like, that's just what I need to hear. This is not on you. This is a complex thing. And so while the problem solving component of it can be quite small, like in any given hour, it's just the fact you're there with someone else who believes that you'll fix it, that believes in you to fix it, or believes in you to get the thing right. And whether that's a colleague or my wife or whoever, one of my mates, it's just like that sense of you're not alone, and it reinforces the fact that you've got value. And so it's just allowing yourself enough time to have those things happen so you don't go and say something that you're going to regret later. It's easy to say and harder to do in practice, but it's a good thing to keep in front of your mind.
What are the qualities of a good day to you? What does it look like now, and would you want it to be the same in 10 years' time?
Yeah, I think because most of my good day centers around like what the kids are up to.
Yeah.
Because like it puts everything in perspective every day, So my worst days are usually Thursdays and Fridays, and it's purely because those are the 2 days in the morning where I start work early. So my wife will drop the kids off to school, so I'll pick them up on Thursday and Friday, which means from the night before until 2:55 I haven't seen my kids, and there's something about that just makes me feel untethered. Because they are the most important thing in my world. And so, which is not unique, lots of parents are like that. But I feel that sense of unease. So then when I get to particularly it's quite hard on a Friday, end of the week, and I get to Friday afternoon and I'm just like, I can't wait to just like get on the scooter and go to school and pick up my daughter. I'm itching to go down there and do it. And when I get there, and often she's like a little disinterested, I'm ready for a big hug and tell me all about your day and all this sort of stuff. And she's like, comes out and she's like, oh, Dad, can you zip up my bag? I can't close my bag. And I'm like, oh, okay. It puts you back in perspective. But that's what you need sometimes, is that sense of, what's really important, what really matters here. Because it's really easy to wind yourself up at work or in your other parts of your life to say these things are actually important. So that part of that's an ideal day thing, is making sure I have enough contact time with them in like meaningful ways and doing cool things with them. But I think the other part is just making sure that I do all the things that I need to do to look after myself. Because another thing that you become aware of as a parent on Instagram is that your kids are really important, but they're not who you are. And you've got to make sure that as soon as they get to a point where they can kind of be a little bit sufficient, so that's when they get to sort of 2 or 3 and they can start to walk and play and talk and stuff, you've got to go on that journey to find yourself again and make sure that you are doing your hobbies, you're doing your interests, you are investing in yourself. And so for me, the daily check-in is things like, have I read today? If I was going to do a workout, did I do the workout today? Have I been outside today?
What happens if you don't do that?
Well, very quickly I know. So usually what happens is the next morning I'll wake up and I'll be in a bad mood. And usually, because I read before bed, if I haven't done it, it's because I've been up too late doing something, or I had to do a bit of extra work, or the kids have been a bit difficult to get down, or something's gone wrong in the day. Something has got out of control on me some way. And that's usually the thing that I sacrifice. And so then if I wake up in the morning, I'm like, why do I feel like this? My first question to myself is, did you read last night? And if the answer is no, I'm like, right, why did you not read last night? Oh, yeah, you're watching the cricket too late. Well, it's your own bloody fault. But if it was something else, like, okay, I need to make sure I catch that, or how do I prevent that happening next time? And you do that enough times, and then you find that my basic marker of reading every night actually happens most nights. Yeah.
So one of your ways of bringing back this anchor of your kids and family is the way your work arrangement is structured at the moment. So that's Wednesdays off for both you and your wife?
Yes.
Can you describe that arrangement and explore how it works with me?
Yeah, okay. So it's the Wednesdays are unique. Actually, I didn't want to truck back, because I think it's important to touch back on that financial component of this whole thing. Because again, we can afford to do that because when I was off work, we realised we could live off my wife's salary, right? Which I don't know how many traditional couples can say that, just with the differences in pay, and then often traditionally there's an age gap as well, so then you've got that to factor in too.
So both you and your wife are in senior positions, and your wife's a director at the moment, right?
No, so she's an associate director.
Associate
So she
director,
is. Yeah. So again, like a lot of this hinges off how brilliant she is. But so we're in a situation where we learnt we could live off her salary, and then when it came to the conversation around what we do moving forward, we're like, well, if we can live on one salary, do we really need two full salaries? Could we live off like 1.6 salaries, so two people 80%? And we sort of thought about it, did the numbers and stuff, and we thought, well, let's do this for at least till the kids are both 5, and just see how things go. And so what that landed on was, well, what day do we have off? And so she started off having Fridays off, and I had Wednesdays, and then she moved to Wednesdays eventually. But the Wednesdays are because I was talking to a contractor at the time when I was deciding how I was going to make this work. And he just said to me, look, if you're not in the office on a Friday, and we often work a Saturday, sometimes a Sunday, that means there's 3 days where I have no contact time with you, Raj. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's problematic. He goes, yeah, look, we could probably make it work, but in terms of keeping things running smoothly the way they had been going, and that job had gone really well, he's like, it's going to be just tough, just much tougher. And so that's why I settled on the Wednesday. And it just meant that typically my Tuesday afternoon and my Thursday morning was just phone calls and site visits to make sure that things were going under control. But yeah, that became the thing. And so in that time, if you ignore the lockdowns, I think I've worked 4 Wednesdays. And each time I've swapped them with another day to balance things out, so I still get that time with the kids. And the thing on the Wednesday now is that originally it was both kids were at home, so they wouldn't go daycare on Wednesday. And now my eldest is at school, my youngest is still at home on Wednesday, so we go off and visit the zoo and go to Motat and museum, and whatever he wants to do is what we spend the day doing. So it's quite neat from that perspective. And again, it brings that balance into the world. And I think the cool thing from a professional standpoint is that it gives me enough time to let my subconscious just think through what I'm doing. And often I'll sit down early on a Thursday morning and all my best stuff comes out.
Yeah. Yeah, can you delve into that a bit further? So how does it affect your creativity when you are technically working fewer hours, but it seems like you've got this respite to your mind?
Yeah, so I think so I came across this concept in a book called, it was either Stolen Focus by Rajan Hira, or it was Deep Work by Carl Newport. I can't remember which one it was, but they're both about focusing at work and how do you get work done more efficiently and stuff like that.
Yeah, the second one by Carl Newport, that's about doing less but do it better.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct. That's right.
Yeah.
So in one of them, it talks about this concept called fixed schedule productivity, and what that's all about is, and the story he tells to start with is, why is it that when you've got 10 weeks to plan for an assignment, you do it all in the last 3 days? And he said it's all about how having that deadline just helps to focus your thinking. It gives you that motivation to make things happen. And then in one of the books, they expand upon it to say, why is it that young parents, particularly working mums, why are they so good at getting stuff done but not working extra hours? Because they can't work extra hours. They've got no choice. It's like a deadline at university. You can't work an extra day because it's not there. They can't work after hours. They can't work weekends. So how do they do it? And so it's the same philosophy. It's fixed schedule productivity. What happens if you know you've only got 7.5 hours? You figure out how to do it in that time. And if you can't do it, you tell someone quickly, or you find the assistance, or you ask the question, or you fix the software issue, or you get your computer upgraded, or whatever it is. You do the things to maintain that because you've got no choice. Yeah. And that's what's kind of going on, I think, for me, is that because I have no choice, because while my wife and I plan our weeks out, usually a couple of weeks in advance in terms of who's going to do pickups and drop-offs on what days, once we've locked in, it's quite tricky for us to maneuver things because she might have a meeting. So actually me being able to do a meeting can be contingent on her not being able to do a meeting, you know? So we have to try and thread the needle on all that sort of stuff. And so what that means is that you start getting very good at knowing what are the things that only I can do. Only I can do this interview with you. I can't send one of my team to come and do that.
Yeah.
Right? So this
you have an AI version of yourself.
That's right, yeah. Some Tesla robot or something. Yeah. But this is where like you start getting really clear about the things that you have to do. And then you start working your way down. Well, if it's a nice thing to do, but someone else could do it, you find that someone else. And you invest your time in training that person because you know that it's going to help you to maintain this over the longer time, which then again reinforces that whole teaching and taking time with people, investing time with people thing, because it allows me to do more of this. You know, I can't offload my networking. I can't offload my time with clients. I've got to do that. So if I've got this thin window because those people don't want to meet at 6 a.m. They don't want to meet on weekends either. So therefore, they're going to be meeting during work hours. If I can't meet them with them on Wednesday, well, then how am I going to do that? And then on 2 days, I'm doing pickups, which means I'm out the door 1:30ish to make sure I'm home in time. So then you've got these really narrow windows. You've got to do this stuff. And there are stuff, I mean, I do end up doing time outside of hours because that's when the kids are asleep and I've got a bit extra catch up on.
Yeah.
But I can't meet clients then. I can't do this then. I can't network then. I can't interact with my fellow shareholders at that point. I can't talk to my teams. So I've got to be very discerning about what do I hold on to, what do I get others to do, when do I do what tasks and during the day, and just having to think carefully about that. And now having done it for 4 years, coming on 4 years now, you just recognize things instantly that you can do or that you need to do, and the things that you don't need to do. And the things you need to do, you get them done as quick as you can. Like you figure out, who do I need to ask? Is there a template I can use? Is there a job I can reference? What can I do to shortcut this? And you don't waste time on thinking about that. You just get in there, and often I'll ask the question of a colleague and they'll be like, Raj, you need to talk to so-and-so. Or no, just do this. Or no, you don't need to do that. Get someone else to do it. I'm like, right, I'm glad I had this conversation because now in 5 minutes I know.
Yeah.
And it just breeds those kinds of behaviors.
Yeah.
And then what it does in terms of the creative side, because there's often something that I have to do. I can't often delegate that down anywhere else. And for me, the creative side more recently has been more around like, how do I connect with people? How do I make an impression with marketing? All those sorts of things. You just need that time to sit down and be at a desk with all the materials and figure it out. And the day off on Wednesday, the balance that gives me, the 4 days in the studio, 3 days away from the studio every week, I think is about right for me to have the time to let ideas percolate, let things just sit there and simmer for a little while before they become something. And then,
does it mean you're actively thinking about them?
No,
okay,
almost not at all.
Okay.
Usually what happens is that I'll see something, particularly if I'm at the museum or Motat, I'll be talking my son through something, or he'll be asking me some really insightful question about something that he's trying to understand. And in me trying to describe it to him, something clicks in my head. And I'm like, oh, right. And I'm then just desperately for the next 2 minutes thinking, keep talking to him, but don't forget to write that thing down.
Yeah.
And invariably I always manage to write it down, usually not then, but I'll get home and I'll pop it on my phone or whatever. But it's not conscious because you just can't. And this is the real fallacy of multitasking, is I don't think it works. I think all you end up doing is doing two things poorly. When if you just really just get disciplined and say, look, for the next however long, I'm here talking to you and that's all I'm doing. And whatever's out there, I'll deal with afterwards. And if I'm really stressed about it, I'll make a list before I come in so I know what I have to pick up afterwards. So I know the first phone call I'm going to make after I leave here because I've made the note to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't have to think about it now. It's already there and the technology will support me to make sure I do that. So no, I think the best thing is to get that respite. And that's where things like, for me, there's so many things I do that I cannot concentrate anything else on. I find working out that way. I find doing things that I'm useless at is really good for that. So me learning how to play guitar, me playing football with my buddies, like those are times where my brain just can't do anything but focus on where that ball's going because I'm just so crap. So then that just means that I get that complete break from everything that's going on.
Yep.
And then when I come back to it, I feel refreshed. And because I'm an active relaxer, that really allows my brain to just digest stuff. And then usually I'll wake up the next morning with just things that I just want to do. And, I'll get through like 30 or 40 emails in my first half an hour in the office because I'm just like, I've got this thing, I've got to get this, and it just flows. It's like this meditative, like this, I can't describe quite the mode you're in. But you look down at the clock and you look at the your outbox and you're like, holy crap.
Yeah.
I've actually been crazy productive in the last half an hour.
You're in the flow state.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's it.
And in a way, it sounds like allowing yourself to be shit at the things you don't really, that you don't really care so much about, doesn't need you to be competitive, and you don't have to put that pressure on yourself and say, hey, I need to execute really well. I just do that meditatively.
Well, that's the flip side of it, though, is that because I do want to be really good at football,
okay,
and I do want to be good at the guitar, but because I have to immerse myself in it completely, I think caring a little bit about that stuff helps as well. And this is like having passions and hobbies, even if you're not, you can be good at them or not, but for me, I find when I'm not good at them, it helps just to really push other things out of my mind. It allows you the breathing space. And because I'm also a big believer that more time does not equal a better outcome. So inverse of that soccer story before with the 2 kids who play 4 and 5 days. You know, the counter to that is, well, what if the kid who does 4 days does it at a higher quality? So in that time that he's spending or she's spending kicking the ball around, it's just more focused and there's a plan and the rings are all laid out and the cones are all there and there's a plan, whereas the first kid who's doing 5 days is just kicking the ball against the fence and doing whatever they feel like. So then that initial proposition falls apart because this new information changes that. And I think that's where having that sense of discipline and focus helps that, because you put those things in place to allow you to succeed.
It's the iterations that you're talking about, not just the time itself to make you better.
Yeah.
And it also speaks to the richness of the experience. Like when you are focused in on something and aren't multitasking, the experience is just a lot more richer and it's a lot more enjoyable. And I have a sense that in a way you feel like you've lived a lot more when you're like completely indulged in an activity, when it's all that you're focusing on, all that you're concentrating on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And you sort of, it happens at this really perverse time. When I do my timesheets, which is the most, when you get into practice, it's the most boring part of work, but you have to do it. And I'm doing
That's the most engaging activity for you.
Well, it brings something out of me. It's a bit like you start putting in your time and you think about all the different things that you've done. And because the process is quite mechanical, but just it's that whole thing of having to get it out so that they can put it into your accounting system to generate invoices and da-da-da-da. But it's just this process of looking at it and be like, oh man, I've got like 40 boxes with numbers in them right now, which means I've done at least 40 tasks. And in those boxes, some of those things will be like several tasks. And you look at that and I'm like, man, I've been productive this week, which is really important, particularly in those weeks when it's easy to feel productive when you've got lots of project work. Because you sort of say, oh yeah, I've done X number of hours on Revit, or I've done these many renders or whatever. And that's really easy. And this is the challenge that everyone comes through when they go through practice. Because to start with, you're doing lots of billable stuff. But then when you get to my position, you're doing a lot less billable stuff. There's lots of stuff I'm doing which is just about engaging with people. It's about growing networks, it's clients, it's all kinds of stuff which you just do without sending a bill. You look at your timesheet and you're like, holy crap, all this time that I'm not being able to invoice for. Mm-hmm. But then what you realize is that actually these are the seeds of what you might have for your invoicing for your forward projects in the future. So, but you've got to be able to look at it. But I look at it that way and I get really excited about it. I think to myself, man, I've really put some time into this stuff and there's been some really good stuff in this. So from that productivity piece, that really helps me to feel really good about this.
Yeah. And oftentimes it seems like what you're doing at a more senior level, when you move away from a little bit of the billable hours, is you're looking at the direction of the company and the projects that you're taking. So it might not pay off now, but it's looking at the future and where you're headed.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I think this draws very well to the conversation we were having just before the recording, which was when you head into times of recession, for example, when it's very tough for the company, that's when people in a senior position come under the line of fire. And that's where a lot of this thinking is a lot more important than just saying, hey, we need to tick off these boxes in terms of billable productivity hours. Can you talk to me about how you navigate that and when a big direction shift is required?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard. I think the thing that we have to convey to people is that while we get the rewards, as investors or shareholders in the business, you get the rewards and things are going really well. And that's really cool. And I encourage everybody, if you've got any inclination to want to be a business owner, it's a really cool place to be in terms of setting direction and seeing what you can do and having the opportunity to really change the world. It's a slog to get there, but it can be really rewarding. But with the reward comes responsibilities. And that responsibility is to say, well, we've got a staff of this many people and we've got to keep the workload coming in so that we can keep paying their salaries so they can go and keep their kids in school and pay for mortgages and all that sort of stuff. And that's a big responsibility to carry, right? And so when you get to tough times, like 2 years ago when everything kind of stopped, post-COVID, and there's a bit of a bump there, and the industry as a whole started to catch a cold, which is since turned into a flu and has now moved through consultants and now moving into the more contractor side of things. You've got to make some hard decisions along the way. And part of that is saying things like, well, I can't afford to keep all these people employed. And that's really tough. But all you can do in those situations is think about the fact that in any business, you've got a body of people you've got employed, and by letting some people go, as awful as that is, it's actually keeping the rest of the people employed. And so it's like a weird like dynamic you have to get yourself into around all of that, which is really quite tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you think about that when it comes to people and their context behind them, where someone might be the only provider for their family, but you're in a tough position where you have to decide between, let's say, 5 people versus 50 people being able to provide for their family. Can you talk to me a bit more about those sort of hidden details?
It's really hard. Yeah. It's really hard because what you don't recognize is that there are people who are quite open about what's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
And there's no right or wrong way, because some people are just more private, some people aren't ready to talk about, some people want to keep work in private separate. There's all kinds of rational reasons for why the level of information that you might have as a job, as a business leader, is not even across your whole team. And so my view on that is you've actually got to take a step back and say, look, I can't use any of that information as part of my process here, because you're disadvantaging someone who might still be going through something, or might not be ready to talk about it, or it's so incredibly personal that they would feel affronted if you were to include that as part of your analysis of a business. And that's where you've almost got to remove yourself from that a little bit and say, right, I've got to do what's best for the business, and then I've got to manage the people who are affected by that as carefully as I can. And that's about recognizing the humanity of it, that on one hand, you've got to keep the business moving, and you've got to keep everything working from an accounting and financial perspective. But on the other hand, some people are going to face some real consequences from this. So how do you help them through that process? And often there's not a lot we can do. Depending on how the market's playing out, sometimes you can do things like say, well, we've got contacts over here, here, and here, and here. Let's just make a phone call and see what happens. You don't often get the luxury of that. And the one thing that's helped, I think, the industry in general over the last little while the drain to Australia has been a problem for us as a country, what it does do is it gives an opportunity to say to some people, look, hey, there is something you could do.
Yep.
Which doesn't require you to submit a CV and be one of dozens here in Auckland. So it's a really, again, to come back to that, I think, statement I made earlier, it's really uneven.
Yeah.
And I think this is where, when you think about people, and this is what I find the most difficult part to get myself disengaged from, is I've actually got to say, no, everybody's got something going on. And so the best way to deal with this is actually to look back at, well, what does the practice need to service projects and to win projects and those sorts of things, and then just manage very carefully those who are going to be impacted by it. And those who are impacted by it aren't just those who might have to leave, it's also those who have connections to those people. Because often you're in situations where 2 people have been working side by side for 10 years, and now they're not going to be doing that anymore. And that's a very difficult thing to manage your way through as well, because that's just inherently, that's going to make people unhappy, and that's an inefficiency you're introducing into your studio.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing you can't measure that on the balance sheet. You can't measure that in a productivity sense. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. The openness that people have about their personal situations to someone in leadership or just their colleagues is something that I hadn't thought about before, which is, okay, you've got people that are, well, it's pretty obvious, but at least it hadn't occurred to me that you've got people that are open about their personal lives to varying degrees. And it's just a bias that where the people who are more open to you would be more at the front of your mind compared to people that may not choose to be. Yeah. And that's a very deliberate decision that you have to make as someone in a position of power.
There's a little slither in the middle as well of people who are happy to tell you but don't want anyone else to know.
Right.
And that's also quite a challenging prospect as well.
So it makes it hard for you to make an argument on their behalf.
Correct.
When you walk into that situation.
And so that's where you just sort of say, well, I've got to step back from all of this and just look at it from a pure business perspective.
Yeah.
And say, well, if I can't apply a rule evenly to everybody and be fair to everybody in that sense, and I can't do it here, there, or anywhere else, it's quite tricky. And the logic behind people telling me stuff, it's a really sound logic. It's the simplicity of being like, hey, Raj, sometimes I might have to go at 3 p.m. on a Thursday. I'd prefer you didn't ask me any questions about it. And naturally I wouldn't. I would just be like, look, I trust you. Just go, do what you need to do, and then just follow up next day and let me know you're okay. But often what the guys will do is they'll say, hey, look, Raj, I've got this thing going on. It's really messy right now. I need to take care of it. It might mean that I need to do X, Y, and Z. And I'll say, look, just keep me up to date. Don't wait for me to be in the office to tell me if you need to go. Just go. Text me later on. Let our front office person know so that she hasn't got looking for you in a fire drill or anything. And then we'll deal with it later. Just look after yourself first and we'll figure it out later. And then that gives enough space for them to do what they need to do. And they've just told me enough that I don't have to ask too many questions, or I understand or respect the situation. But that's not a license for me then to go and tell everybody about what's going on.
Yep.
So there's a subtlety in all of that, which again comes down to just giving people the opportunity to be their own advocates, to decide for themselves what they think is appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you navigate this tension when you just started out in architecture in '08 with the financial crisis, and being at the rung of a recession, and then now as a person in a senior position? Talk to me about the tension between those two roles.
Yes.
How did you look at them differently?
I didn't really know what was happening in '08, to be fair, because when I left uni, which would have been like November, most of my colleagues, most of my compatriots here they already had kind of like a plan for what they wanted to do, whereas I wasn't really that set. So they'd all been quite studious about CVs, getting in touch and da-da-da. So quite a number of them have already found work. A number of them have connections with people, so they were working with project managers or architects that they knew. And so I didn't think too seriously about recessions and all that sort of stuff, even though it was already being forecasted. And then the next January, I must have printed and sent in 30 CVs, and I got one phone call to say, yeah, sorry, we're not hiring right now. So I'm sort of sitting there thinking, what the heck do I do now? And then I remember I was walking through, because I had a few more months left on my university gym membership, so I was using that as a way to get out of the house and get into the city. So I was walking back to the domain where my car was, and a friend of mine called me and said, oh, look, S&T are looking for someone. Do you want to pop in and drop off your CV and whatever? And she was quite deliberate about saying, do you want to pop in? Because I didn't recognise it at the time, but there was a huge, and I carry this now, there was a huge weight put on people who had the courage to come into the office and ask to see someone, which I think they appreciated how scary that was. The person I wanted to speak to wasn't there, which is okay. So I left it there, and then they called me back and I went for an interview like a week later, and that was the job. But so from that perspective, I was just grateful to have anything. Yep. And my view was, unfortunately, when I started, within weeks, they had to make the first round of redundancies there. And so talking to my dad about it at the time, he's like, just absorb whatever you can. Look, you might only be there for a few weeks, but just take it on board and learn as much as you can. And so I was like, well, if I'm not, there's no consequence, I'll just be chirpy and chatty and get along with everybody and everything, not recognizing that the business sense was like, well, if I'm cheap and cheerful and I've got some good drafting or CAD skills, which at that stage were pretty poor, but still better than some others, they were like, well, we'll just keep him around. He's nice to have here and he doesn't cost us anything. So I ended up sticking around through all those redundancy rounds because I was just cheerful and cost effective.
You're valuable to the firm's culture in a way.
In a way, yeah, in a way.
In a lot more different of a way.
Correct,
so
yeah.
the people who got paid more.
Yeah, which they didn't, and I didn't recognise it, and I suppose they didn't get to know me that well for a little while, but I think in the end it was like a bit of a happy accident because, yeah, they both them and we gained a lot out of that dynamic, and in that environment where people were pretty grey, it was pretty downcast, just having someone who came in with a little bit of energy in life was actually kind of a good thing. And I had a couple other colleagues who were similarly minded, so we brought that into that group, which I think was quite helpful for keeping things going. So my view on managing business and recession and redundancies and stuff is quite coloured by that whole thing to start with. But what I do remember is there was at one point they had to make a redundancy, and I can't remember specifically the reasons, but they had to make a round of redundancies, and then one of the directors, because we were all we went out for a drink as a group of staff. We came back, and we'd all had too many to drink. So we thought, we'll go sit in the kitchen at the office and just sober up before we try and go home or whatever. And one of the directors was still working, so he came in and saw us, And I'll never forget, he ordered pizzas, so they all got delivered, and then he sat with us there while we bitched and moaned and whinged and everything about what was going on. And he provided some context, but not a lot. But I'll never forget the fact he sat there with us in what must have been the most volatile situation for him to be in, because we were all pretty pissed off. And just the fact he was comfortable enough, or strong enough, or understanding enough to sit there and make sure we got home safe. You know, he got us, I don't know how many pizzas he ordered, but just there's pizza everywhere. It was like quite a lasting impression about just seeing the people on the other side of it. And I think he also recognised that while it was a small number of that group who were being let go, it affected the whole lot of us. Because over those, it may have been the third or fourth round of redundancies we had to face in that short period of a couple of years. We'd all been impacted by losing someone that we did care about or did work closely with, or some other thing like that. So that colours that perspective for me a lot, because I think about the human side of it and what people need to see, and how do you provide like trust, and how do you provide support, and all those things, when ultimately when you're at the other end of this continuum, when you're at the leadership side, like you are the problem. Because while the economy is doing whatever the economy is doing and the market's doing what it's doing, the number one job for me is to bring work into the company.
Yeah, you need to be able to take care of your people.
Correct. And if I'm not doing that, it almost doesn't matter what else is going on. I have failed in that core thing, right? And so, I mean, that comes back to the whole reward responsibility thing, and recognizing that that's what it comes with.
Yeah.
Is you've got to be prepared to do that, those difficult things should that come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that you said at the start of that was so interesting. You said by that time you hadn't gotten to know yourself very well. You said, I didn't know me very well. What are some of the things that you've learned about yourself since then?
They like getting paid. So the difference between being at university and being at work was that at university, you know, I was working some really cool jobs, but you're only working like 10 hours a week or whatever.
Yeah.
And so
not getting paid much at all, even for those hours.
Well, even those, I mean, I was fortunate enough. I was doing math tuition and stuff, so I was earning okay. And then I had a bit of a stint with Noel Leeming, so I was getting commission on that, so that wasn't too bad. But yeah, like, and then of course you're just living and breathing architecture all the time, which for me I like variety, and that wasn't my vibe. You go to work, and particularly in that recession environment where, like, you know, the employer can't really demand anything of you. So I was, you know, sticking to my 37.5 hours a week, and I was, you know, in the door usually I was in there early because I'm a morning person, but I'd be out the door at 5 at the very latest, and most days it'd be like 4. You know, I get paid every week. And so suddenly I was going from this position of being like time poor and not having much money in my bank account to comparatively being time rich and having money in my bank account, which at the time wasn't a big salary, but it was still more than I was earning for. And so I loved that. And to me, it was just like, oh man, just keep this going. This is great. And even then, I wasn't doing glamorous work per se, but because of the nature of the environment, I was on site at the airport like 2 or 3 times a week. Because the guys I was working with just couldn't manage it all themselves, and they just needed somebody who was, you know, keen and could, like, you know, follow them and shadow them and didn't mind being told what to do. And to be frank, I didn't care because I was just so grateful to have this new lifestyle. And so I learned a lot about myself there in terms of there was a pressure at uni to be, I think we put this on ourselves as students, or certainly I did, to be in love with what I was doing for work. And what I realized at uni is that I loved the people. And I went through university with some fantastic people who taught me so much and helped me grow so much. But I didn't love what I was doing. It just happened to be okay at it. So it was like a skill thing rather than a passion thing. And going into work, I was like, oh, this skill thing is actually really valuable, but it doesn't have to be my passion. And that's okay. And that was like a really good lesson to learn, is that your passion and your skill don't have to be the same thing. And that is quite liberating in many ways.
Yeah.
And it's okay if they are the same. I think if you're one of those people in that sweet spot, hey, that's a great place to be. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think that can lead to some genuinely great innovation and great outcomes. Mm-hmm. I think it can be harder to achieve a balance with that, but there's some natural synergies there which are really great. And as a designer, like, that would just be a utopian thing to have. But if you haven't got that, I think it's about saying that that's okay. So the 10 people who are listening, it's okay to not be in that situation.
Hopefully 11 now.
Yeah, who've grown the group. Yeah. But yeah, it's okay to be
Yeah.
passionate about a different thing to where your skill set lies.
Yeah. Yeah. Just as long as you're doing it in a sincere way. I
Yeah,
think
that's right.
you
Yeah,
take to it.
and if you can, and that's not to say I don't enjoy what I do, because I do.
Yeah. You wouldn't be doing it for this long if you didn't.
No way, not in a million years. It'd be a real slog. I think you've got to find the things that you enjoy about it. But again, that's different to being passionate about something, which is okay as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Your dynamic's really interesting to me, with sort of your passions being different from the thing that you're really good at. Obviously, a lot of overlap in there, and then with your family as well. And my mind keeps coming back to the split that you have amongst these different areas, and sort of the way and the respect that you talk about, the way in which you. I need to gather my words. The way in which you talk about your wife and your family, as well as your work, and my mind comes back to this quote that I heard once, which was, "If more money wouldn't change the way you structure your day, then you're already rich." And it just seems like you've got a life, and you've very deliberately set it up in a way that it is all that it could be. It's approaching all that it could be.
Yeah, I mean, pretty close. I mean, if you said to me today, Raj, you can have more money and you can buy a nicer car and all that stuff, I'd say yes, of course.
Yeah.
Because that'd be a nice thing to be able to drive around in an EV or something. But I think, it comes down, because sometimes that value set. And again, I've had the privilege or luxury to be able to be in that position to think about that, because not everybody has that. But I think it's a really wonderful thing. And I think what's really important is when you do enjoy any of these privileges and you have the chance to do things differently, you need to. Mm-hmm. If for nothing else, just to be able to show people that you can do things differently, and that's okay. Yeah. And I still to this day do not know whether this is going to be a successful endeavor in terms of the 4-day week or the balancing what family and kids. I mean, my kids could grow up and still hate me. I don't know, right? But you make your best decisions based on your current circumstances and you give it a go. And it would have been so easy for me to try and say to my wife, look, I'll go back full time and you just potter or do 2 days a week or whatever. That would have been really easy as a male in our society, in our industry, to do that. But I was like, no, I'll give this a try and just see what happens. Admittedly, the initial part was like, I can spend more time just doing nothing. And of course, that was before I thought about what doing nothing looks like with a kid. But I think it's just about that value set. So if you've got that some sense of privilege or advantage, like how do you use that? One, for your own benefit, but two, for other people to see that there's a different way to do things. The subtle example I'll give, which I think applies to more people than it might not apply to, is when we were buying a house, we deliberately decided to buy near a train station. So we ended up out in Swanson, so it's quite a long way in terms of driving time, but on the train, it's fantastic. You just sit down on the train and you can read, you can work, you can do whatever you feel like. But if I choose to sit down on the train with my laptop and work, now my commute is now work time.
You've claimed back those 40 minutes of the day.
Correct. Yeah. So that means that actually if I jump on the train in anything like a normal working hour, then I'm actually doing work. And particularly in our remote work, flexible working environment, that's a really good thing. And so, talking to some of my colleagues about it, be like, well, if you live near the train station, why don't you try it? Like, what's stopping you from sitting on the train for your first half hour of your day? Just organise your emails, do your timesheets, plan your day, and then come with the office. Like, how different is that really? Rather than you sitting here and doing it with me annoying you for the first half an hour, give it a go. And I've had a couple of people try. And there's other things that have got in the way, but at least they've tried. And that's not something that's directly related to like maybe privilege as such, because you can choose to live near a train station. So it's just about thinking about how can I do things slightly differently? What am I giving away for free, like time in the car, that could go to something else? So I think that's on people like me who have got that advantage, structural advantage, whatever it is, to do things differently so that people can see it's possible.
Yeah.
And then figure out, okay, if I step back from that, what are the things that Raj has that I don't have? What could I do in here that would make my world just a bit better, or give me the time to do things I'd rather be doing, or invest my time in a different way?
Yeah. What have been some of the most rewarding aspects of your career so far? What keeps you going?
Oh, goodness. My grandmother, who lived with us for quite a long time, it's been the last 3 years or so of her life in a aged care facility. She passed away in 2009, I think it was. And she was, because she was around us, in our house, and she had a really tough life. She was, mental illnesses, like a laundry list of different things she was challenged with, and but she was a really sweet woman, a really lovely lady, and when she passed away, I used to go to the facility in Point Chev like once a week, usually on the way home from university or the way home from work, and she was happy. She was so happy, like happier there than she'd ever been at home. And I thought that her going into that facility, because I must have been like 19 or something, I would have been a little bit older than that, maybe early 20s when she went into it. And I just thought, she can't even speak English that well. How are you going to enjoy this? But she had the time of her life, because she was, she was playing bowls and she was doing bingo, and she had this autonomy that she just, in a traditional household, just never had before, with all the challenges she had in her life. One time I turned up and she's got purple hair, because her eyesight had diminished so much that the purple was the only thing she could see. And it was awesome, right? She was so happy. And the staff used to talk to us about how we would come through as a wider family all the time, and how that was really unique and really wonderful. And that stuck with me, because I sort of thought, it's really sad that that's unique and wonderful, because that's my grandma. That's someone's mum, someone's auntie, sister. And that's true of everybody in this facility. And so, that was when I was just getting into architecture. I just started working when she passed away. And it's kind of left a bit of a legacy on me, so that when I decided it was time to move on from S&T, because I'd been there almost 10 years, when the guys I interviewed with talked about aged care, I was like, oh man, this could be finally a chance for me to, reconcile my bar's life and do something that might help to move things along in that space. And it's been a real privilege to be involved in that sector, because I can see the stuff that people are doing, getting involved in more recent times with people living with dementia, and just thinking about how do you draw families in, how do you prevent isolation, how do you prevent points of failure, how do you do all these things that just lead to a richer life for a longer time. For people who are given a lot, there's still a generation, if you're in your 70s, 80s, you still have a generation where you've given a lot and not got a lot back. You still of that generation where you will work every hour of the day, save every dollar you can save, kind of thing, give everything to your kids.
But you're the post-war generation.
Basically, yeah.
A very hard, at least psychological environment.
That's right. And so, you just get into that space, and I'm like, yeah, I go into these facilities and stuff, and often I'm there in a bright jacket as well.
Yeah.
And people will say hello, and I'll say hello back. And they'll say hello like I'm a local. And I know that they're being polite. I know that. But for me, it's like, I'm making a difference in here. Mm-hmm. And I'll reflect upon it and be like, yeah, they're just being polite. But I'll be like, no, I'm in this building where I've helped to make things a little bit more safe, or a little bit more enjoyable, or a little bit easier. We've made spaces that families, grandchildren want to come to, You think about that. To go back to that spreadsheet of the number of people we can impact, that's massive, right? And I've been fortunate enough that, whether it be with aged care more recently, or even doing the Kainga Ora stuff I did, which is a bit less glamorous as well, or less glamorous than aged care. There's always been this sort of, or even the MOE stuff I used to do, there's this social consciousness in there of trying to do little things that just make life a bit better.
Yeah.
And I think just getting involved in aged care in a general sense has been really awesome for me in that sense. Because I often think about my grandma, and I think about on one hand I beat myself up for not trying to get to know her more. On the other hand, I recognise that it would never have been feasible. Language barrier, her trauma, my black and white worldview as a 20-year-old, all those things are just not perfect for me to learn. But this is a way to do something, to pay it forward, to do something that makes it hopefully better for somebody else, to have that interaction or relationship. Even if people are moving into palliative care or things like that, it's a chance to share stories, it's a chance to engage, it's a chance to be around people and not let people become isolated, which just makes me feel kind of hopeful, makes me feel optimistic, it makes me feel like what we do has purpose, which I think is really, really, really powerful.
Yeah. In talking to Anna Chong as well, she echoed a lot of the same sentiments, which was making spaces that are about a really meaningful experience, I guess you could say, for the people that use them. And it's not just, well, in Anna's case, it's not just about designing hospitals that meet the functional requirements, but It's about designing a community space that the wider context wants to come into, and that kids even feel delighted to go to, which is sort of similar to the way that you treat your projects. Can you talk to me about the dynamic between you and Anna, and how that plays out in the firm?
Yeah. So Anna and I are we're team leaders. So she leads the kind of healthcare team in principle, and I lead the general architecture team in Auckland. And so what that means is that if a project comes in, and Anna's a shareholder as well, so she leads winning of work in the health sector, and I tend to lead with two colleagues winning work in general architecture, and that can be aged care, social housing, apartments, car dealerships, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And so what happens is Anna and I end up managing the resourcing of those projects, the pastoral care of the staff. Her and I bounce off each other a lot. So if she's got a challenge or whatever, we try and figure out together how to manage that from an HR perspective or from a best pastoral care perspective and things like that. And then she's been quite a good foil for me because she's just got a little bit more experience. She's been around the block a couple of times. She's very level-headed, but very passionate. So she's someone who is passionate about architecture, and that's a good counterpoint for me as well. But then I also see all the things that she does to advance, like women in architecture, or advance the needs of patients or the needs of staff or the needs of those people who kind of can easily get forgotten in the scale of a big thing. Projects in the health sector can be hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes. It's very easy to forget about the people on the ground in that situation. So she always brings that great perspective to that. And so what we've often found is that we're opposite in the opposite places. I'll be feeling, flamboyant and boisterous and positive, and she'll be feeling a bit downcast. And then we'll bring each other back into like a nice equilibrium. And then sometimes it happens the other way around.
One day switches.
Yeah, and it does switch. It does switch. And then her and I do a lot of, we've got an office in Christchurch, so her and I travel down there quite a lot. She does a lot more than I do. But it's just in trying to get to know a new market and figuring out together with our colleague down there, how do you grow a business? How do you make new connections? How do you establish a presence in like a completely different environment? And that's been fascinating too, because it just gets you thinking on these like really big philosophical levels about how you do that. And then the irony is that it comes back to that connection piece, which Anna's very good at as well, just being present and talking with you and making you feel important, and seeking your counsel. And suddenly you're like, hang on, but I'm the younger, less experienced one here, and I've walked away from this feeling like I'm a rock star, and you just feel like really good. And so that's the sort of dynamic that we tend to have, is that we just try to play off each other a little bit like that and provide a lot of support to each other just to make sure that we can keep the value set that we treasure front of mind, even when we get some of the more pragmatic challenges that are out there around trying to manage people, trying to manage teams, trying to keep projects running, watching deadlines, all those sorts of things. Yeah.
What are some of the things that you're looking forward to in the near future?
I think because it's been quiet, the whole industry's been quiet for the last, and quite uneven for the last 18, 24 months. I think the ingredients are there for that to change. You've got a government who's coming into the last year, 18 months to last year of their current term. You've got interest rates coming down. There's a lot of uncertainty around the world, around economics and stuff like right now. But I think all those things play into like an environment that they do two things. They either make people feel confident because they've got confidence that their sector's going to have some investment, or that interest rates are going to fuel some investment or something. Or it makes people say, well, forget all that, I'm just going to build. I'm just going to make things happen because I need to keep my world moving, whether it be having greater assets or improving their assets for their residents or their stakeholders or whatever. And I think because people have been holding on for so long, there's just this momentum. It's like the dam's about to break, where everyone just wants some good stuff to happen. And I feel like, construction and building stuff is good stuff. People feel energized by it. And so I sort of feel that the next period's about that. It's about making sure that, people who are engaged and conscientious and thinking carefully about all of this can bring their expertise to make sure these things happen quickly.
Do you think it's a culture shift and not an economic shift that's about to happen?
Yeah, I think it is, because a lot of the baseline things that we talk about with our clients haven't changed a lot. Mm-hmm. They're still pretty steady. We know that building anything per square metre rate is going to be X, and it only ever gets higher over time. Yeah. We know that interest rates have an influence on what happens, and we know that the government can have an influence on what happens.
But if you want to build, you're going to build.
Correct. And the other thing is that building, if you're starting from scratch on a big job, you're looking from when you can actually open the ribbon, cut the ribbon at the front door, you could be anywhere from 3 to 6 years. And we know with like building, architecture, construction, that's like a drop in the bucket in the lifespan of a building, of an investment, of an interjection in society. So it's like, well, can we show enough imagination to say, well, what does it look like at the end of that period? And it's not that hard once you get into that mindset of being like, well, okay, it's going to look bad on paper right now, but actually, if you can just have some fairly conservative but forecasts that go into the future, you can kind of see the patterns are still there. That property increases in value, that we've got an aging population who are going to need to go into rest homes. We need to have more schools. We need to have more healthcare providers. All those things need to happen. Yeah. So the question is, do we know where? Do we know how big? So it's about moving away from that first question and into the second one. And I think that's where the energy is going now. Yeah. And so we'll just have to wait and see what happens over the next little while.
And is it right to say that if you were to picture it as a graph, the market today might look like this, but if you were to zoom out, it's like that?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So you're looking at the building in its whole lifetime, and not just is the value going to be returned within the next 5 years or the next 10 years?
Correct. Okay. Which that changes your thinking from maybe the developer end of the continuum, more to like the institutional, large corporate government type end of the spectrum, where they're looking at like a 20, 25, 30, 35 kind of year kind of time span to get their return on investment. And in fact, with government, return on investment is not the same thing. So yeah, it's just that imagination to say, well, how do we make this all happen?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind when you mention that is the whole vision with Britomart, and not looking at it in the early 2000s when it was being developed, not looking at it in the span of the next 5-10 years, but the next 50 to 100, and looking at what the culture of the space, or what the culture of an institution in some cases would be over the next long term.
I think it's a really good example though, because it's happened under our feet. Yeah. And unless you're on the train frequently, or you're one of the businesses in the city that have been hit by the works at road level, like you don't even know what's going on. But there's billions of dollars going in there, and I don't think we understand just how much of a seismic shift that's going to be for our city. Like I think when that's connected up, we become a real city for the first time in my lifetime. Just the fact that you can come from the WOPs into the city in a reliable way, wait times will be less. The amount of density you can start to build up around these stations, the way it could reinvigorate at places like Aotea Square or K Road, it just completely changes everything, I think. And it just starts to bring some energy into the city. I can just see that there's positive spin-offs every way I look on it. It just needs to happen. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a very hopeful and perfect place to call it a day. If people want to get in touch with you, how do we do that?
So there's lots of different ways. I mean, you can. I'm on the Chow website, so you can look me up there. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got an Instagram, both as an architect and as a private person. So Raj the Architect is the handle for Instagram. But yeah, if you reach out, I'll find you, or you can find me through all the normal ways.
Thank you very much, Rajan. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.